Hey everyone, welcome to my next lesson about parameters in Revit API. Make sure to watch all the previous parts. And before getting started, if you want to learn all topics regarding Revit API in depth and enroll in my paid Revit API course, you can reach out to me via email in the pinned comment. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, like the video, and leave some comments. So let's get going. Do we have some limitations when it comes to working with parameters in Revit API, when it comes to adding parameters to Revit API, to be more specific? And the answer is yes. We can only add shared parameters. We cannot simply go and do something like this, add and use a parameter type of project parameter. Only shared parameters can be used. So that is the first limitation that you should keep in mind. So whenever you want to add a new parameter to the Revit project file, you need to start with getting access to your shared parameters and then simply add them to the document. But now let's go through the classes that are responsible for each of that thing. So what we learned with you is that let's go back. So we learned that we need to go to the document class. We need to go to the document class there, and we need to find the property that is called parameter bindings. So once you find that property, you will get the instance of the binding map, and which is responsible for like asking whether a given parameter, like whether we have this parameter already. We can even erase some parameter, like some definition, as you can see. And again, it's really important for you to understand the terminology. So when you're saying erase definition, and because it's exactly what we need, right? Each parameter, like here, we have parameters for them, but definition is something that describes all like common parameters. For example, mark, we can have 100 marks, but like 100 marks in terms of we have 100 walls, and for each of them we have one mark, and they can be described by one object, which is definition. So this is why when we need to erase a parameter, we simply say, erase that definition, that's it. So what is really interesting right now for us is to insert it. So here we're saying, I want to add the definition from it. So to insert it, we need to pass the definition. And that's logical, right? We have a shared parameter file when we describe our parameters like what their type is, something like this, right? What name do they have and all of this stuff. So we're saying that is the description of them. Then we need to pass a binding, which is kind of like an interesting one. Like, what is a binding? What's that responsibility? So if you go with bindings, we say binding objects are used to take a parameter definition and bind it to one or more categories. So again, let's go back to Revit and refresh our memory about how to create it. So we go add, what information do we need to pass, right? Because this is something, as you can see, when we add the parameters here, it doesn't matter whether we use like project parameter or share parameter. You still, for example, when you specify the shared parameter, what you can specify there? You can specify what categories it should be for, like its walls, floors, so on and so forth. Also, you can specify the group that is under, and also you can say whether it should be type or instance. So we need to know how to tell Revit, how to tell it via Revit API, what categories to use, whether it should be type or instance, and what group parameter that should be stored under. So let's go through each of these things. So if we go there, so binding class is actually responsible for knowing what categories to have and whether it should be type binding or an instance. So let me show you. So you can actually explore it. What methods does it have? Not a lot of them. So we go to the hierarchy. We see that, oh, we have some element binding which inherits from it. So it's a better version of this. So as you can see, it has like, and it's also like an abstract class, right? So that is an abstract class. So right off the bat, if that is an abstract class, that means we cannot create an instance of that element binding. So for us, the main purpose of that abstract class is that they should store some common behavior across all bindings. And the common behavior across bindings is categories. So each of them should have a category. Again, we keep in mind that bindings, for the time being, they're responsible for knowing which category we want to add to the parameter and whether it should be type or instance. So again, it's an abstract class, so we don't have any chance of actually creating that one, creating an instance of this. Also, again, if you keep in mind, you should keep in mind that we can simply type binding and go equal, and IntelliSense will tell us how we can create an instance of this. So it's also a great way of checking that out. But we're going to go through the documentation. As you may notice here in the inheritance hierarchy, we also have two more of these, instance binding and type binding. So here, what we have is that right now we have instance binding, and now we have a constructor for this. So you have a constructor, you have an empty one, or you can pass a category set. And a category set is just an enumeration of categories, right? We already seen that and we work with that. So it's just an element that stores categories in it. So also we know, as you can see, when you click on properties, you can see that it has a property called categories. But why it's not in here? Because it inherits it from element binding. So if you go there, you can actually analyze it and see, oops, okay, I'm gonna do this. It's a bit faster to make it that way. So here, as you can see, we have getter and setter. So that means we can easily set new one. So this is the way how you analyze all of these objects in here. So I prefer to use this. I prefer to set this via constructor, right? So that can be great. So now we need to know like, but how do we create a category set? So if you again explore that further, let me kind of close it off, explore that further, and we have category set, which has a constructor, it has an empty one, and it has one of the methods is to, as you can see, we have insert. So we can insert a category in it. And here it specifies whether it was inserted or not. So basically, it's as simple as that, and that's logical for us, though eventually we will have like a list of categories, and depending on whether we want to create instance or type parameter, we will choose between two of these. So as you can see, we have element binding, and we can create either instance binding or type binding. So we have two bindings in there. And it also has a constructor, works pretty much the same, to be honest. So here we at least see that now we know which thing is responsible for it. So which thing is responsible for holding the information about the categories and whether it's a type or an instance, and that is binding. So binding is responsible for storing type or instance and categories. Who is responsible for the group? So if we go back and here we see this binding map because this is where we started. This was our starting point. We know what is the definition. So it's like a common description of a parameter, and it can be internal or it can be either internal or external. So internal means that it's the project parameter. External means that that is the parameter in your project parameter file, right? You don't have external definitions in your project. When you add a, we're gonna see this, but if you add a shared parameter and external definition into your project parameters here in the document, it becomes internal definition. So let me go there back. So we know what is the definition. That is responsible for like a common description of our parameter, like what is the name, the type. We have the binding, which knows about which category should be used and whether it should be type or instance. and we have built-in parameter group. So what is the built-in parameter group? That's actually a simple enumeration of all the groups that we have here. So here we can specify what group we wanted to store under. To be honest, some of them they're not descriptive at all. And the way how I kind of check what group I want to work with is that I simply select a Revit element. And for example, let's say I want to go with the identity data. I'm going to go to the Snoop current selection. Again, I have a shortcut for this. If you don't, you simply go Snoop current selection, or if you haven't put this in this quick toolbar, you can have it, you can pass it there, like Snoop current selection. So you go to parameters, you find the parameters you're interested in. For example, mark, okay, mark, and you go to internal definition because this is how we describe it. And here we have the internal definition. So our definition actually knows the group that that is under, right? Parameter group, PG, identity data, right? Identity data. So that's the way you explore it because some of them can be really not that descriptive. For example, other is invalid. So it's not descriptive. So the main trick here is to do this via RevitLookUp. It can help you a lot in researching what you need. So we got familiar with classes for interacting with this kind of field, project parameters, how to add all of these things. But how can we, for example, reach external definitions? How we can get these shared parameters, right? So how we can, via code, what classes are responsible. Again, we're not writing anything. We're just talking about what classes are responsible for this because you need to know what class to look for when it comes to creating these parameters. So here we would need to like imagine that we would have here something here we would have like parameters. How we can access this. So first of all, our Revit application, right? It should store some information about its shared parameter file. So let's kind of check that out. So if I go to the application, to the Revit application, right? So we talked about these classes. So it's just Revit application. And if you go to properties or even to methods, here you'll find a method called open shared parameter file. So you can actually open the shared parameter file that you have in here. So for the time being, I don't. We'll see in future how to create your own, but for the time being, let's imagine that we have one. So it means that we're going to get the access to this shared parameter file. And maybe let's even create one. Let me create this. I'm going to create it. Okay, let's save this. Okay, so now because I want to show you how we can interact here, so we're adding some groups like let's things that it will stand for architecture, and then I'm gonna say new parameter. I don't know, like any parameter, I don't care. Any parameter, any parameter. We say the discipline comment and the type. Let's make this just a simple text. Okay, so this is where it is. So I would just want to kind of do a comparison of, make a comparison of how we actually interact with this. So we have the access by opening shared parameter file. We have an instance of a definition file class. Okay, so basically what we did is that we kind of reached that that stuff, right? So now we should have some access to interaction there. Also, you can all the time you can check out some information about here. So here we have some examples, great examples, so you can check them out. Not great, but you can still check them out. So definition file. What we can do in Revit, let's think about this. So we can actually get all parameters, so under specific group, right? So if I add a new group, for example, let's say that that'll stand for structure, and here I'm going to go with the str one. I don't care. Let's even make this that way. So we can switch by groups, like we can switch groups and it will give us different parameters. So that is the first thing that we would probably want to do. So our definition file knows about its file name. So if you go to Revit, here we have the file name, so it knows about this. Again, compare this with what you have in Revit and everything will make sense. So we have a file name and then we have groups. So here, as you can see, definition groups, which is responsible for knowing about all groups that you have here. So in our case, we have Arch and the one that stands for structural. So as you can see, it's just an enumeration of definition groups, right? So we can easily cast it to definition groups and read information about them. So you can even go further and check out like what information do you have, for example, name. But let's kind of go back to the definition groups. So we can either get information about them or we can create it, right? So we get access not to the content of it, but we can also get and create it. So we can simply say, you know what? I'm gonna go here. I'm getting the access to the group, and I'm saying I want to go with new group. So we can easily add new groups by using this method create. Also, you can definitely check out some stuff in there and like basically get what you want. But let's suppose we want to get it by some name and eventually we've got just one definition group, right? So let's suppose we've selected that Arch group. Then we can easily get all groups and pick up with the name that you want to have. Again, we're going to look later at the great methods that we're going to create to make our life easier and to not worry about all this stuff. So let's suppose I'm going to create this Arch group. So what you need to do is that you'll have this definition group instance, and that is responsible for that one group. And here you can get the access to the name of the group, right? Or you can get the access to all definitions in it. So basically, once you retrieve that group, you can ask what is the name of it. Also, you can ask what are the definitions in it. And in our case, it will be only one definition called any parameter. So great, right? So we have these definitions, so we can get access to them. Again, we can get definitions and what that represents, just an enumeration of definitions. Again, we're asking, we have a group, we want to get all definitions that we have in that group. Again, we're used to terminology parameters, but it's not quite correct. Parameters, that is something that we have in Revit Elements. What we have in like share parameter file or just the project parameters where we have a list of them, it's more of a definition, not the actual parameter. It's just the thing that describes it. So here with these definitions, once we get access to them, that works the same thing as it worked for the definition groups. So we can easily create it, right? So we can easily create it. Of course, we need to pass some options in there, right? But I think let's go to the constructor. You need to pass a name, right? Because again, you simply ask yourself a question. Okay, I want to add a parameter. What I need to pass to add this parameter? And if you go new parameter, you need to specify the name, the discipline, and the type of the parameter. And here, as I can see, we are passing the name actually and the parameter type. So we don't pass the discipline. So that's the way that works. Basically, it's very simple if you just go step by step and first of all you understand the access to each classes and just simply how that works in comparison with manual approach. So this is the way I tend to learn these things. Oops. So I basically make a comparison, right? And I understand what is the difference and how I can do the same thing via Revit API. So now we're familiar with all classes that we need to work with them. Also, what I wanted to touch upon is to go back a bit, and here we talked about category sets. So let me show you here like type bindings, category sets. We learned that we can create an instance of them by simply having a constructor. But just to give you an idea that we can also go to the application, and we can access the property called create. It's the same as document and document create work. So the application creation object is used to create new instances of utility objects. So if document creation is basically responsible for like mainly putting objects in your document, like creating a new instance, all of this stuff. This one has a lot of like methods like for creating instances, like new category set, for example. As you can see, we can also create it by this application. So it's up to you the way you use it. Actually, I think Revit API recommends it to use from here, but I didn't see any like bad thing from using that from the constructor. So everything is great. You can use this the way you wanted it to. That's it for this lesson. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and have a beautiful day.